Hey, how's it going everyone? Today we've got a versus battle that I think is pretty interesting from a theoretical perspective. Gojo versus the 5 Kage. This is one of those fights where the result is honestly dependent on how you think a specific interaction will go down. The Naruto verse does scale a lot higher than the JJK verse, but that's more so because of the high-end characters like the Otsutsuki or Six Paths. If you ask me, one should look at the matchup and not the verse, and this fight is a perfect example of it. I don't want to take too much of your time, so shameless plug, I have a Ko-Fi and a Discord. For only a one-time payment of $2, you can join my Discord, or you can become a YouTube member and get early access to my videos in addition to the Discord. I would also appreciate it if you could like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel, and I'm trying to get to 10k subs before the end of the year. If you can help me reach that goal, I'll make Naruto versus Luffy happen. Like always, there won't be any verse equalization, so with all that out of the way, let's begin. I don't think I need to give a massive introduction for the 5 Kage. Tsunade, Ei, Onoki, Gaara, and Mei are the shadows of the 5 great hidden villages. Each Kage is either one of, if not the strongest ninja from their respective nations, with each excelling in a different nature transformation or combat style. They're honestly a versatile group where every single member does bring something to the table. The Hokage Tsunade has the highest AP in terms of raw physical damage. Her monstrous strength coupled with her medical ninjutsu, but more importantly her strength of hundreds healing, makes her one of the more dangerous Kage since she can either fight in the front lines or stay back and heal. Her mitotic regeneration jutsu uses the chakra she's accumulated in her forehead to accelerate cell division, granting her regeneration that can even regrow limbs and organs, making this her trump card. However, a big drawback is that the large consumption of chakra, especially when she's performing medical ninjutsu. The actual amount of chakra she has stored up varies since she's used up her entire supply to protect Konoha from Pain's almighty push, and she's likely only had months to recuperate her Byakugo sealed chakra reserves. The Raikage A is easily the fastest member of the 5 Kage. His mastery over ninjutsu and taijutsu allows him to use the lightning chakra cloak. This jutsu allows A to increase his reflexes and movement speed to the point he's hailed as the fastest shinobi in the world until Naruto dodges him. Coupled with his already tough body, it also grants him an even greater defense that can even withstand a Chidori. The databook states that A is capable of running at almost the speed of light when using it in conjunction with B to perform the A-B Lariat combo. A's speed is a contentious topic since the databook statement says he can run at almost the speed of light, but most people use that to round him up to light speed, at least when using his top speed or version 2 lightning cloak. Part of this comes down to the fact that the original Japanese translation says light like speed, however the term gotoki is apparently used in simile kanji, which implies that the light like speed statement is more like a simile than a literal comparison. To put it simply, the Raikage's speed may not actually be light speed, especially since the databook statement is the only statement that implies a speed. He has a ramped up version of his lightning cloak, more commonly referred to as the version 2 lightning cloak, but Kishimoto never really implied a possible multiplier for this state. This is important because we could at least infer how fast the Raikage could be at his top speed, but there really isn't any way to quantify how much faster A gets while using the V2 lightning cloak. There's also a comparison made with the Raikage and Darui's laser circus jutsu that I see quite often, and even though the databook states Darui can manipulate multiple light rays when he uses this jutsu in conjunction with C's flash pillar jutsu, which generates a genjutsu light that blinds the opponent, the laser circus beams reach the Ten Tails after the flash of light. Light speed in Naruto is kind of inconsistent, and while there are characters who can react to light speed attacks or use attacks that can travel at the speed of light, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can run at the speed of light. I need to get this out of the way early because I honestly don't think that A can run at the speed of light, but for the sake of the video, I'm willing to at least grant him light speed while he's running at top speed to at least be fair. The Tsuchikage Onoki has by far the most dangerous kid of the 5 Kage. Particle style is absolutely nuts. By creating a three-dimensional shape with his hands composed of earth, wind, and fire release, Onoki can disintegrate anything that comes in contact with his jutsu on a molecular level. He can make the jutsu larger or smaller, and he can change the shape to fit the situation. However, particle style does use up a lot of chakra. He also has the capacity to create earth golems and can manipulate the gravitational pull of whatever object or person he makes contact with thanks to the weighted boulder jutsu and the lightweight boulder jutsu, which he used in conjunction with Gaara to stop a meteor. Onoki can also achieve flight thanks to the use of the lightweight boulder jutsu and can combine it with A to make him even faster, although granted to an unquantifiable degree. The Kage Gaara is an ex-Jinchuriki of the one-tailed Shikaku. He has a living sand that automatically protects him from incoming danger. He can create sand structures like sand tsunamis or pyramids in order to suffocate his opponents. He's possibly the most versatile of the Kage since his sand can be used to create platforms for the Kage to stand on. He can shoot it as projectiles, and he can perform sealing jutsu like the Grand Sand Mausoleum. Finally, the Mizukage Mei has 2 Kekkei Genkai, Lava Style, and Boil Release, which she can use thanks to her water, fire, and earth nature transformations. She can create different kinds of mist that can either obscure the enemy's vision or burn the target's skin with corrosive gases. She can also create waves of lava that can restrict her opponent's movements, and her water-style jutsu is just as, if not more powerful than a small platoon of water-style specialists. Now, in order to talk about Satoru Gojo, I have to first talk about the 6 Eyes. This jujutsu trait grants the user extraordinary perception, which allows them to see the flow of cursed energy, and in turn, they can decipher the mechanics behind an opponent's cursed technique. The user gains incomparable control and efficiency when it comes to cursed energy, so much so that Gojo is the only person that surpasses Sukuna in efficiency, and his precise control over cursed energy manipulates it at an atomic level. The user's eyesight is comparable to a high-definition infrared camera and can see kilometers away. However, their ability to detect objects without cursed energy is completely reliant on the environment and objects having at least residual cursed energy. It makes things complicated because depending on whether or not Gojo fights an opponent in a location from the JJK world will greatly affect his ability to at least differentiate them from the environment. If he fights in a location that isn't in the JJK verse, then he'll have to rely entirely on his instincts and reaction time. Granted, he should be capable of sensing the presence of the Kage since he was capable of at least being aware of Toji's presence as a child, which Toji stated it was the one and only time that had ever happened. Toji doesn't have any cursed energy thanks to his heavenly restriction, and because of this, Gojo couldn't sense him or follow his movements easily, but that was before his awakening. Having the 6 Eyes active and uncovered for extended periods of time can also cause exhaustion, although Gojo didn't seem too bothered by this while fighting Sukuna, and he could stay awake for 3 days straight while the 6 Eyes were active pre-awakening, so it shouldn't have that big of a toll on his stamina, especially since his eyes were completely uncovered during the entire month before his battle with Sukuna. The biggest benefit to having the 6 Eyes, besides the fact that he can use Limitless, is the ultra-precise cursed energy efficiency through complex control. The amount of energy expended while activating his curse technique is infinitesimally close to 0, making it virtually impossible for Gojo to run out of energy. Gojo can also use RCT to refresh his brain from fatigue, so he's always running at maximum efficiency. Now, moving on to CT Limitless, things get a lot more complicated. Limitless is absolutely busted, but it's rather complex, so I'll try to do my best to give you an idea of how the technique works. There are 3 primary abilities that come from Limitless. Infinity, which is the power to stop. Blue, which is the CT lapse of Limitless that allows the user to converge space in order to create an attraction effect, and CT Reversal Red, which is essentially the power to repel. Infinity is the first ability we need to talk about because it's Gojo's best defensive ability. It's the convergence of an immeasurable series, so anything that approaches Gojo will be slowed down to the point it seems like it's stopped. In other words, Gojo can create an infinite series of space between himself and his opponent. The closer they get to him, the slower they will get until it looks like they've seemingly stopped. Think Achilles and the tortoise. In mathematics, no matter how many times one divides a number in half, they will never reach 0. Gojo's CT brings this concept to reality. After awakening, Gojo was capable of automating this technique so it can detect objects and people based on the intensity of their cursed energy, their mass, speed, and shape. Gojo can also increase the size and intensity of this invisible barrier to make it less likely that an attack can reach him, and in certain cases he can even crush an opponent behind the force of his infinity. Blue is the strengthened or lapse application of Limitless. With it, Gojo can create blue orbs that have a magnetic or gravity-like attraction field. It's an extremely sophisticated technique that allows Gojo to pull 2 or more targets into each other. He can implode his target if he covers them in a blue sphere, crushing them under its force. By applying blue to himself, he can perform high-speed movements and even increase the force of his punches in addition to cursed energy reinforcement to produce extremely powerful attacks that Hikari states it feels like you're taking a counterpunch even though it's just a normal blow. As for CT Reversal Red, it's a lot simpler compared to Blue since it's essentially a small red orb that uses the power to repel in order to create an intense explosive force. Because Red is a CT Reversal, it's composed of the positive energy one gets by multiplying negative cursed energy with more negative cursed energy, so Red actually has twice the amount of energy output as Blue. Finally, let's talk about Hollow Purple. This is an extension technique that can only be used by someone with the 6 eyes. By combining the convergent force of blue and the divergent force of red, Gojo can create an imaginary or virtual mass that results in Hollow Purple. The user can launch this imaginary mass in any direction, dealing extreme destructive damage wherever the attack goes. It's powerful enough to destroy a city, carve into a forest, and completely disintegrate whatever body part it comes in contact with. Even Toji, who has a heavenly restriction which amplifies all of his physical stats to superhuman levels and has a body of steel that also resists curses, had a portion of his midsection completely destroyed. There are examples of targets surviving Hollow Purple like Hanami, however they lost an entire portion of their body as a result, and only survived because they are a curse. Sukuna is the only person that has tanked a Hollow Purple from Gojo, however in the first instance he lost his arms and in the second most of his body suffered heavy damage. Sukuna only survived these attacks thanks to his cursed reinforcement, massively increasing his durability. I could talk about Unlimited Void, but I don't think it's necessary since it wouldn't work under the conditions I've set up for this fight. Since I don't consider verse equalization when I talk about these versus battles, there's no point in talking about an ability that specifically requires the opponent to have cursed energy in order to both land its sure hit effect and prevent the opponents from escaping. However, there is a big benefit in not being able to use domain expansion in this fight. After activating one's domain expansion, the user will have their CT in a burnt out state. This just means that utilizing Limitless will be extremely difficult, but Gojo does have a workaround. Since he can't use Unlimited Void, Gojo doesn't have to worry about utilizing a large portion of his cursed energy or having to fight while in a burnt out state. Now that I've gone into detail about what these characters can do, let's talk about the win conditions, since there's no point in having a debate if there isn't a win con. None of these characters have immortality except maybe Tsunade. The Kage need to have a way to bypass infinity, while Gojo needs to eliminate all 5 Kage while preventing Tsunade from healing them or herself. As I mentioned earlier, the result of this fight is heavily dependent on how one chooses to interpret certain information, but more so how one would consider a very specific interaction to go down. That interaction being Particle Style and Limitless. I'm going to be honest, as far as I can tell, the Kage have absolutely 0 win conditions against Gojo if Particle Style can't touch him. But before we get into that, let's talk about speed. For the Kage, I'll use Kakashi as a baseline since he was capable of cutting a lightning bolt with his Chidori, which would be named Raikiri or Lightning Blade after this feat. He performed this feat while he was still a teenager, but we only get a glimpse of this feat from the anime, and unfortunately he was already an unquantifiable distance up the tree, and the lightning bolt didn't drop until he was already up a certain distance. As for the interaction, we don't actually get to see exactly how things went down. The Kage should be faster than this young Kakashi, so they should be anywhere between massively hypersonic and sub-relativistic, since they should be slower than the Raikage, and as I mentioned earlier, his only light speed statement is more of a simile than a direct comparison. By the way, I'm talking about movement speed. The Kage should be anywhere as fast as lightning and sub-relativistic when it comes to their ability to run. Their reaction and combat speed should be relative to their movement speed, however there are plenty of examples of ninja having reaction time that's greater than their capacity to move, like when Itachi blocks Kirin with his Susanoo, which is stated to be a light speed attack. As for Gojo, JJK speed scaling is weird and kind of inconsistent because depending on how one interprets certain feats, this verse can actually have way higher reaction speed than their movement speed implies. Let's use Maki as a baseline like Kakashi. Maki was shown to have the capacity to dodge and easily keep up with her cursed cousin Naoya, who could reach speeds of Mach 3. This happened after she had removed her mental restrictions and could finally fight completely unimpeded, thereby becoming a fighter that could equal the late Toji. Toji, as some of you may know, could completely blitz Gojo during their first fight, and because he had no cursed energy, made it more difficult for Gojo to even perceive his movements. So I bet you're wondering, how could I possibly get Gojo to be massively hypersonic or even subrelativistic if Maki is at best Mach 3? Well, I don't have to get Gojo's movement speed to that point, I just need to get his reaction time, and funny enough, there is a bit of evidence that can support this. For starters, let's talk about Gojo vs Toji round 1. Gojo was utilizing the 6 eyes unimpeded for 3 days straight without any sleep. The first time he got tagged by Toji, he had just deactivated his 6 eyes. Toji stated himself that Gojo was the only person that had ever noticed his presence, and he had to wear down Gojo before he fought him in order to dull his senses. While he did speed blitz Gojo, this happened before Gojo awakened. After his awakening, Gojo could casually dodge Toji's frontal approach and even blitz him back with red. As Gojo used Hollow Purple in the anime, it seemed as if time itself had either slowed down to a halt as he activated and released the attack. This is important because Toji had swung the inverted Spear of Heaven, which was relatively close to hitting Gojo, but even it appeared motionless as he activated and fired Hollow Purple. For reference, in the anime, while fighting his son Megumi, Toji could see and turn his head towards Nuei's lightning in slow motion. He also walked away from the attack with 0 damage. Against Gojo's Hollow Purple, Toji's facial expression didn't change and it seemed like he couldn't respond to it like he did with Nuei's lightning, which could mean Hollow Purple is faster than lightning. In my Sukuna vs Buggy D Clown video, I talked about this feat in conjunction with a feat that Maki had performed in the manga where I had said that she either dodged Sukuna's version of Nuei's lightning or she had tanked the attack. It was brought to my attention in the comments of that video that in the official volume release, Kage had added a couple of extra panels, one of which confirmed that Maki did in fact tank the attack, which makes Sukuna's statement about her not being easy to take down more consistent. Now, while this does mean that Maki can't dodge lightning bolts, it does mean that she can also react to them since she could put up her guard as they were coming down, and this could translate to combat speed since she could raise her arms and block in response to the bolts coming down. These bolts came from a 15 to 16 finger Sukuna who is slower and weaker than the one Gojo fought, and he showed the capacity to both keep up with and fight both Yuji and Maki at the same time with one hand each. After eating 19 fingers and his own mummified head in order to make up the difference of one lost digit, Gojo fights an even stronger version of Sukuna. If you've watched my Sukuna vs Buggy video, you'd know that I believe Sukuna has, at the very least, borderline light speed reaction time. After his fight against Gojo, while his body was recovering from the massive damage caused by Gojo's impromptu Hollow Purple, Sukuna immediately had to run a fade with Kashimo, the god of lightning. In a previous battle, Kashimo fought Hakari, who could partially dodge Kashimo's electricity at close range. Granted, he still lost an arm even if it didn't matter. Kashimo's cursed energy has an electric trait that allows him to discharge electricity at his opponent, which can't be blocked. Now, trying to find out what the speed of electricity is can vary depending on whether or not we're talking about electricity in electronic devices or signals sent through wires, which I don't think is necessarily what Kashimo is doing. However, Kashimo does refer to his electricity as lightning. This should put Hakari at massively hypersonic reaction time since he could perceive Kashimo's attack and move his head out of the way so that it only hits his arm at basically point blank range. When Kashimo activated his curse technique, Mythical Beast Amber, he gained a variety of abilities, one of which allows him to release electromagnetic waves. For those of you that may not know, EM waves travel at light speed in a vacuum, and in an atmosphere like the one on Earth, they travel at about 99.98% times the speed of light. In other words, a negligible difference. Sukuna dodged this EM wave attack at point blank range at the exact same moment the attack was fired. This is important for Gojo because it means that Gojo would also need to have at least relative reaction time to Sukuna in order to combat him, including at close range, especially since Hollow Purple was capable of somewhat catching Sukuna off guard. However, Ijichi had set up a barrier in order to make Sukuna read the attack late. Gojo was about 4 kilometers away from Sukuna when he shot his 200% Hollow Purple, and Sukuna should have likely been capable of seeing the attack travel that distance, but he only reacted at the last minute. I'm not saying that Hollow Purple is light speed, but it's seemingly faster than lightning, at least according to Toji's reactions to both it and Nue's lightning. And given the 4 kilometer distance between Gojo and Sukuna, Sukuna should have been able to see the attack coming even if Ijichi's barrier made him misread the output of the attack. The page says he wasn't able to sense the immense output of energy until it was right in front of him, and considering a weakened Sukuna can dodge a point-blank range borderline light speed attack, one could argue that Hollow Purple may also be relativistic, but do with that information what you will. Unlike the players who jumped in after Gojo died, the version of Sukuna Gojo fought wasn't being affected by Yuji's punches, which targeted the boundary between Sukuna and Megumi's souls, affecting his cursed energy output and also decreasing his physical control. The version of Sukuna they fought would have gotten progressively weaker and slower as Yuji hits him. Now, just to be clear, I'm only arguing that Gojo has relativistic reaction time. I'm not saying he should be capable of running at the speed of light. I clearly had to go a lot more in depth for the JJK speed scaling than I did for Naruto speed scaling, but that's because it's a lot easier to get a ballpark for how fast Naruto characters are, since the Raikage is the fastest of the 5, so at best he's traveling at light speed, while the rest of the Kage should be relative to, if not faster than, a massively hypersonic teen Kakashi. Meanwhile, for JJK, all I really need to figure out is Gojo's reaction time, because he really doesn't need to move as fast as the Kage, he just needs to be capable of reacting to them, and considering he should scale above the likes of Hakari and Maki by a large margin, means he should at least have that massively hypersonic reaction time, bare minimum. If one considers that he can fight a completely unrestricted Sukuna plus 2 Shikigami on his own, while a weakened and damaged Sukuna can dodge a borderline light speed attack at point blank range, then this would mean Gojo should be in that massively hypersonic to relativistic reaction tier. So why go through all this trouble just to scale Gojo's reaction speed and possibly his combat speed, but not movement speed? The simple answer is that Gojo doesn't really have to worry about keeping up with them physically. He can increase his movement speed by an unquantifiable amount, thanks to Blue, and he can also teleport, which I will be talking about a little bit later. Besides arguably particle style, there is virtually nothing that the 5 Kage can do in order to hit Gojo. I looked through their jutsu list to see if there was anything the 5 Kage had in their arsenal that could potentially bypass Infinity. Tsunade and A are primarily taijutsu specialists when it comes to combat. Neither of them can bypass Infinity with their punches, which in turn means besides crushing the ground, Tsunade can't really fight Gojo, so she's basically relegated to using medical ninjutsu only. A can amp his speed even further if Inoki is on his back, to move at arguably faster than light speeds, but it's entirely unquantifiable. Even if Inoki increases A's weight with the weighted boulder jutsu, I can't exactly say whether or not that would bypass Infinity. The biggest problem when discussing Infinity, in my opinion, is that most of the time, arguments may resort to the no limits fallacy. For those of you that may not be aware, a no limits fallacy usually occurs when someone states that something has no limits because there isn't any evidence that said limits exist, which is kind of ironic considering that I'm talking about an ability called Limitless. The issue here is that we actually don't really know what the upper limits of Infinity are. We know that Gojo can tailor it to automatically detect objects based on mass, speed, shape, and or the amount of cursed energy it may have, but because Limitless has never been bypassed unless the opponent used a specific counter, like Domain Amplification or the Inverted Spear of Heaven, this would mean that arguing about its upper limits will ultimately devolve into headcanon. If there is even one example of an object having a strange enough shape, high enough mass, or acceleration, then I could probably try to form a conclusion. But the simple truth is that Gojo stops everything that comes his way unless it directly counters Infinity. Even if one could argue that a speed followed by a super weighted boulder jutsu could have the potential to bypass infinity, Gojo can always just increase the output like he did against Hanami. As for Mei, I'm gonna be honest, the only thing I can think of that Mei can be useful for is the hiding in mist jutsu to obscure his vision. I'm not gonna consider her boil-released skilled mist jutsu as an option since it shouldn't bypass infinity, and Gojo should have an answer for either mist jutsu thanks to Blue since he can just pull in all of the mist with it. Gaara, on the other hand, is interesting because he arguably does have light speed sand projectiles if you believe that Darui's laser circus is also light speed since he used it in conjunction with that attack to blast Sasuke. But as I mentioned earlier, I don't believe laser circus is light speed, and either way, it still can't bypass infinity. I've seen some arguments brought up in my Discord where some of the members brought up how Gaara could potentially seal Gojo with the Grand Sand Mausoleum, however the sealing jutsu is tied to the sand and the sand can't touch Gojo. Put it like this, even if he does cover Gojo's entire body with the Grand Sand Mausoleum, the jutsu itself can't seal him and he would have at least 2, maybe 3 options for escaping. The first and most contentious one is red since it's an energy blast that repels things away from Gojo, although I think it's the weakest option. The second option is teleportation, one of the abilities Gojo gains from Limitless. By compressing space and coordinates, Gojo can achieve instantaneous movement as Kusakabe put it. He can teleport over large distances like when he brought Yuji with him in his fight against Jogo, or when he teleported after being released from the prison realm which was in Japan's trench 8,000 meters below the surface. The biggest problem with his teleportation is that Kage said Gojo can only teleport over specific conditions, but those conditions are never explained. The third option, and likely the most consistent one if you for some reason believe Gojo can't teleport out of the Grand Sand Mausoleum, is Hollow Purple. Considering the damage Hollow Purple can do, especially when unrestricted, makes this the easiest answer to escape the sealing jutsu. Besides being able to protect the other Kage with sand or giving them footing so they can fly above Gojo, I don't exactly know how most of them would deal with him. Limitless is this stupid of an ability that even with arguably better overall stats, the Kage can't exactly touch him. So then, what about Particle Style? I'll be honest, it's a 50-50 depending on how you think this ability interacts with Limitless. For starters, the jutsu is slower than A, considering Madara had an easier time responding to it than any of the Raikage's attacks. It's not a light speed attack. What about shape? Particle style jutsu usually comes in the form of 3-dimensional shapes like cubes, cones, and cylinders. I don't think Limitless would have trouble identifying it. How about mass? I've seen some people argue that particle style has no mass, but I haven't found any canon information that would suggest it doesn't. As for Limitless, I can't find a statement that would suggest objects with no mass can bypass it besides the sound-based attack that Jogo used, but it didn't actually hit Gojo anyway. Even though particle style disassembles a target at a molecular level, Gojo can manipulate cursed energy at an atomic level, and either way he would have to get trapped in the jutsu before it atomizes him, which I don't think would ever be the case since the jutsu can't just bypass an infinite series of space. I honestly can't tell you whether or not the jutsu would even be capable of expanding on Gojo since it would need to bypass that infinite space first before it reaches him. What about that giant particle style that Onoki used to defeat the 25 Wood Cologne Susanoo? This is definitely the only jutsu I could see bypassing Gojo's infinity simply because of how big it is. If you think the jutsu can bypass infinity, let me know down in the comments. The only reservation I have with it as an ability that can bypass infinity is that we've never seen Limitless interact with a technique like particle style. For the sake of fairness, I'm willing to at least consider it as a possible win condition, but only the boundary dismantling jutsu. Unfortunately, considering the jutsu should be slow enough for Gojo to react to, I can see him teleporting away before it lands or increasing the output of infinities to make it more difficult for the jutsu to touch him. If either of these are the case, then Inoki will be extremely low on chakra. Now, how would the fight actually go down and who do I think wins? If the boundary dismantling jutsu can bypass infinity and Gojo can't teleport away or increase infinity's output, then it should be an annoying but just as effective win for the Kage. If it can't, bypass infinity or Gojo can teleport away, then the Kage are screwed and they would literally have 0 win conditions, especially if it's possible for Gojo to stop the boundary dismantling jutsu by increasing the output of infinity. There isn't a single interaction in either series that could even remotely imply a precedent for the possible interaction, except maybe Gojo's own impromptu hollow purple hitting him, but that was his own technique. If you ask me, Gojo is more than likely going to win, not because he'll overpower the Kage, but because they can't outlast him. Gojo doesn't run out of cursed energy. In fact, it's virtually impossible for that to happen because of the 6 eyes. Even if you could somehow quantify A's Biju level chakra reserves or Tsunade's Byakugo seal reserves and somehow compare that to Gojo's cursed energy reserves, he would always expend energy at a rate that's infinitesimally close to 0. For example, if A has 200 points worth of chakra and just having the lightning cloak active uses up 1 point per minute, he would run out after 200 minutes. On the other hand, if Gojo has, let's say, 20 points of cursed energy maintaining infinity, or using any of his other abilities, would use up so little energy that the number would be closer to 0 than a positive real number. Think of it like using a fraction of a fraction of a percent of cursed energy. A would always run out first, especially if he has to maintain the lightning cloak active in order to outspeed all of Gojo's attacks. Before awakening, Gojo could stay up for 3 days straight while running the 6 eyes around the clock, and the worst outcome was his senses becoming dull. After awakening, he can use RCT to keep his brain fresh around the clock, and after escaping the prison realm, he could walk around for a month without a blindfold and showed no signs of fatigue even while fighting Sukuna after multiple domain expansions. Particle Style uses up a lot of chakra per Inoki's words, and the larger he makes the jutsu, the more chakra he'll expend. He only has so many chances to catch Gojo before he gets hit with a hollow purple.
But Eon, JJK characters are multi-city block level at best. Gojo wouldn't even scratch the Kage with hollow purple. After all, Inoki tanked a meteor.
JJK gets massive amounts of downplay because the destructive capacity for the upper end of the characters at best destroys portions of cities, but DC is not the same thing as AP. Considering how easily Gojo could destroy about 4 kilometers worth of a city with his 200% hollow purple, and how he could essentially turn a large portion of Shinjuku into rubble with the impromptu hollow purple, his AP can be much greater than his DC implies, and considering hollow purple disintegrates literally everything it comes in contact with besides Sukuna's reinforced arms and body, would mean that even if the Kage can survive a blast, they would still suffer some kind of damage, especially the less resilient Kage like Mei and Onoki. Onoki did survive the second meteor falling on his head, but he didn't exactly tank it and needed a medical ninjutsu treatment in order to continue fighting. Let's be honest, a meteor and an imaginary mass are not exactly the same thing. I can imagine Tsunade could heal from the attack and even regenerate a limb, but considering that she could get stabbed by Madara's Susanoo sword and she could suffer massive burn wounds from his fire style jutsu, I don't think it's disingenuous for me to say that an attack that disintegrates everything it comes in contact with wouldn't at least hurt her. One would also have to consider that if any of the Kage get hit with hollow purple and lose a limb, then Tsunade won't be able to completely heal that injury. I'm aware that ninjas can increase their durability by funneling chakra to specific portions of their body, but it doesn't outright negate the damage. Kabuto, who's relative to adult Kakashi, could tank Naruto's first complete Rasengan, but he still suffered massive damage. If Tsunade or Inoki go down, then the Kage lose their sustainability and win condition. Like I said before, this isn't a fight that would end in an instant or even a short period of time. You can say it would last 3 days, maybe a week, but the Kage are going to tire out before Gojo does, and if he lands an impromptu hollow purple, then all 5 would take the hit at once, and considering the state he left Sukuna in, even through cursed energy reinforcement would mean that all of them would take massive damage at once, even if you think it wouldn't kill them. I could imagine Gaara protecting himself with his sand, or A, taking the least amount of damage since his body is naturally tougher than the average shinobi, especially if he has his lightning cloak active, but the best case scenario I would say is A, walking away with arguably less damage than Sukuna, and even then, he would be the only one left standing that still can't touch Gojo. Gaara would definitely lose a large portion of his sand, and at best be capable of retrieving the Kage with whatever is left in order to regroup, but nothing is preventing Gojo from just doing it again. As Todo mentioned during the final battle with Sukuna, Yuta, who had taken over Gojo's body, would have to fire as many hollow purples as possible once his CT recovered, considering Yuta wasn't comfortable with the technique, but Todo implied he could fire them back to back. I can safely say that if Gojo lands an impromptu hollow purple on the 5 Kage, regardless of how they survive, he can start picking them off one by one. A long drawn out battle is also preferable since Gojo can ramp himself back up by landing black flashes. He was capable of landing at least 4 black flashes against Sukuna and his Shikigami. If he lands any black flashes against the Kage, not only should it deal considerable damage since the force of the attack would be raised by the power of 2.5, but it would also increase his combat performance, allowing him to operate at 120% of his current maximum potential per black flash. So just to sum it up, I think Gojo is more than likely going to win this fight, even if it boils down to a war of attrition. Even if the Kage do outstat him, 4 of them quite literally cannot touch him as far as techniques or jutsu go. Onoki has to use chakra to fly or to amp any of the other Kage. I'm not going to say whether or not Gaara does use up chakra when he's flying with his sand, but the best he's doing is just playing defense for the Kage. Tsunade and any of the Kage she's healing have to remain somewhat still in order to heal up any damage that they may take, even if you want to argue that they would last quite long because Tsunade can heal them. Her Byakugo seal does still have a finite amount of chakra, and if she overutilizes it, she's going to revert into an old granny and be completely useless. Gojo can pull them in whenever he wants with blue. If any of the Kage are in a position where they need to either heal or stay back, Gojo can immediately target them, and there is nothing any of the others could do to keep him away, especially since he can teleport. Even if Gaara flies up into the air and creates a platform for Tsunade to heal any of the Kage, Gojo can teleport and levitate and blast them with a hollow purple. This is a matchup that isn't won by stats and is entirely won by hacks. Even Hashirama, who has one of the highest chakra pools in the entire history of Naruto, ran out of chakra after about an entire day of fighting Madara. Granted, they were going all out. Even if the Kage tried to play as safe as possible and they reserve as much chakra as possible, they would still run out before Gojo, especially since he can fire hollow purple after hollow purple at them. I genuinely tried to sit down and speak to multiple people, including members in my Discord, in order to formulate an approach that the Kage could take without needing to plug in a controller and give them as much information as possible. Limitless is just that stupid of an ability without the proper information or tools to counter it. It's extremely hard to make an argument that Particle Style could bypass Infinity without any precedent, and it ultimately devolves into headcanon. But anyway, that's the end of the video. If you think that Particle Style can bypass Infinity, or if I missed something that could entirely turn the fight in the Kage's favor, let me know down in the comments below. Thank you all so much for watching. I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.